What is up, my friends? Welcome to the Role Clarity Roundup. Today's going to be all about the job of campus pastor. Multi-site churches have exploded in growth in the last 20 years. One statistic showed that in 2000, there was basically 200, and then 20 years later, over 5,000 multi-site church. And so this is part of a series focusing on local churches and helping leaders think strategically, how do they communicate the role clarity for some of the significant positions in their church and ministries. I'm Lee Taylor. I help leaders of churches, schools, and small businesses create role clarity, revolutionize the way they clarify the roles with their teams. We believe role clarity can be created quickly, simply, and easily, and that's what we're here to do and to help leaders actually make this a reality for their team. So today, I'm excited to have Amos McFalls with me, a friend of mine, somebody who's really become a good friend over the last couple of years. He pastors Christ Church's Ruston campus, Christ Church in West Monroe, and they also have a Ruston campus. And so I know you're going to have a lot of fun talking with him. We always have a lot of fun talking with each other. But I like to start off with, Amos, as far as your origin story. How did you end up at Christ Church in Ruston?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you so much, Lee, for allowing me to be. It's such a privilege and an honor to be on this Role Clarity podcast. What a great experience it is for me. And I know, campus pastor. You just mentioned this. I did not realize there were 5,000 other campus pastors out there. That's encouraging to hear. But it seems like a new field. And so there's a lot of people like myself who really need to be connect with each other. I've got to be learning from people who are doing things better than I am. So that's really cool. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for talking about this subject. It's very meaningful for me. So what happened is I have known Pastor Tom, the senior pastor here at Christ Church, for a long, long time
Okay.
through an organization called Destiny that licenses and ordains pastors.
Okay.
And so our church there in Mississippi was connected with that organization. And so I've known Pastor Tom, Pastor Ryan for a long time. And then several years ago, about 3 years ago now, I got a phone call from him, said, hey, they had this campus and they had a campus pastor position open. And would I pray about being a campus pastor here? And honestly, I was not looking. That wasn't something I wasn't looking to move. All of my family, all of my wife's family was very close there in Mississippi. And so began to pray about it and knew that that's what God wanted us to do. And I'm so grateful, so thankful for that call from Pastor Tom and the Lord. So that's how we
Awesome.
ended up in at Christ Church in Ruston.
Cool. So as far as Christ Church as a whole, how long the church has been in existence in West Monroe?
Oh, that's a great question. I want to say 1963 was the
Okay.
first year, and that may or may not be false. I could just make that year up.
Yeah.
It was
Okay.
founded by Pastor Tom's father,
Okay.
and so yes, but so such an influential family here in West Monroe. And if you just talk to anyone, they love that family. So the Lowe
Yeah.
family's amazing, amazing pastoral family.
Cool. And how long has the Ruston campus been open?
Yeah, so Ruston just turned 5. The campus
Okay.
turned 5 back in March. We just celebrated our 5th birthday. Exciting, and I've been here for 3 years.
So let's just jump right into it. One of the things that I like to do here is to go into the weeds, and I say it every time. Everybody says, "Let's stay out of the weeds." We're going into the weeds of what does it look like to actually fill the job of a campus pastor. I always think whenever we're preparing for these conversations, somebody maybe like you 3 years ago who gets that call is like, "So what exactly am I going to be doing? What does this mean to be a campus pastor?"
Sure, yeah, and just like you said, it's such a relatively new position. So there's not a lot of books I can read. There's not a lot of people I can
Yeah.
even talk to. And so one of my best friends in the world says being a campus pastor is like having someone hand you the keys to a brand new car and just say, "Don't wreck it."
Yeah.
And so, although that's not exactly the case, there's some similarities to that metaphor. So, as a campus pastor, one of my biggest the biggest privileges I have to work with is just championing the church culture at a different location. And so, as the pastor there, I have the honor to lead those people pastorally, while our senior pastor and the executive pastor preaches regularly. So there are different systems for campus pastors. I don't know, or for campuses, and I don't know how much you want to get in the weeds in this, but there are some that live stream the sermons every week, which that's what we do. There are some who preach individually at different campuses, and then there's some that mix that up. There are some that rotate. So anyway, there's different methods
Yeah.
and to keep that same culture. Well, for us, our senior pastor, for the most part, is at the broadcast location in West Monroe, which means that I am the boots on the ground for trying to champion that culture, making sure that people understand that we are one church. We just have multiple locations, and trying to help our people feel as loved and as honored as possible, and vice versa with the other campuses.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the questions I was going to ask was I know there are different models. You see different
Hmm.
people doing this. So the approach there would be that mainly the broadcast site would do where the preaching would happen, and that would come in to the Ruston campus. And also there's another campus in Sterlington, so there's a
That's
couple
correct.
of different locations there for the church. So, okay, so that I think that's a good perspective because it can look very different. So,
Mm.
understanding that, let's go into what does your week look like? I mean, what fills up the calendar, the schedule? I know you do it all, but let's just talk through what that includes. What does the week look like?
Y- Yeah, sure. So one of the things that's unique about working in a couple of locations is I do have an office in West Monroe, and then I do have an office in Ruston, which means I split my week. Um, for the most part, our pastoral staff will take Mondays off, so the day after the big service. So usually Mondays are rest day. I try, and we can talk. We could talk for days about
Yes.
what rest is, and that's such an interesting concept. But and taking a Sabbath. But that Monday is that Sabbath day for us, for my
Okay.
family, and so we try to guard that really well if we can. And then Tuesday is a meeting day, so that's the first day that all the staff is back in the office, and we work hard to set up not only big corporate meetings with the entire staff, but individual meetings. And so we'll meet on different aspects, whatever needs to be covered over that. Maybe we're talking about the service and some things that went right. Maybe we're talking about some things that we could be better at. But and then we're talking about big picture stuff. So there's a lot of meetings that happen on
Okay.
Tuesday specifically. So it's very rare that I'm actually in Ruston at the campus I lead, at that location on Tuesday.
Okay.
From that, we're on Wednesday. My day usually starts off in Ruston. There's a small group that I lead there with some incredible men, and then I make my way after that small group to the West Monroe location, where we do some smaller meetings. Usually, there are meetings that happen because of the meetings on Tuesday, so we might be discussing something specific, and
Yeah.
then we do something that I haven't really experienced before that I love about Christ Church, and we have a pastoral leadership small group. So every Wednesday, we devote a time to get together and we study God's word together. We cover some either leadership material, some spiritual growth material, but we do that together. And so there's always really great conversation in that. We grow together, keep each other accountable, and I think that that's so important. That's another thing we could probably talk for days about, but
Yeah.
so that's very instrumental for our pastoral staff here at Christ Church. After that, as the day fills up, then we do have an executive team meeting on Wednesday, and most of the time that covers what happened on Tuesday, covers any issues, and sets us short term and long term goals for either that weekend or maybe the season that we're in. Maybe we talk through some of the sermon series or the leadership opportunities we have coming up, as well as any kind of needs from a campus perspective. And so we can probably talk a little bit about this later, but as
Yeah.
a campus pastor, there's more than just ministry. There's these different things we're taking care of. And so that executive meeting is for any type of big picture items that we need to address.
Cool.
Um, Thursday for me, I'll usually go straight to Ruston. And for me, I try to stack Thursday as heavy as I can with individual meetups or ministry meals or meetings or coffees with people that attend Ruston.
Okay.
It's my first day since Sunday that I can devote all of the day to Ruston, and so I try my best to stack that as much as I can and help pastor people, help mentor people if possible, and some of it's been mentoring me. So that Thursday is, I usually try to stack it as tight as I can. Um, Friday is if I've missed anyone, I try to make sure that I'm being able to meet with them that day as well. But Friday, I devote to anything that needs to happen around the campus. And some of that's quite random. It's just different things. I'm the only full time staff member that's at that
Yep.
campus. And so what that means is if there's anything that's wrong or anything that needs to be fixed or painted or repaired, then I'm focusing on it somehow. If I'm working with
Yep.
someone or volunteer or I'm doing it myself, Fridays usually ends up that it looks like that.
Yeah, which I loved when you and I were kind of giving me the tour of like the worship center everywhere on Friday. There's like something on the floor, like you're taking pictures of it. It's just this immediate glimpse of like, man, this whole thing falls under the purview. So like we're talking ministry ideas and the service, and then like, you're spotting a stain and like making sure that's going to get checked in on
That's
or
right.
whatever. So there's just something ever since then I've just have thought back. I'm like, that was such a picture of probably like what he was saying about the campus pastor life was
Yes.
like, hey, I need to take a picture of this and work on it.
Yeah, totally unplanned. We walked in the auditorium. There's this stain on the carpet. I'm like, where is this stain coming from? So while I'm, taking you around, introducing you to the campus, I'm taking pictures of those things
Yeah.
and be like, this has to be taken care of, and it was.
Yeah.
So our team did a great job.
For sure. Yeah, that was so awesome. So what I'm seeing there is Tuesday and Wednesday are very much you're at the West Monroe campus working with the team, coordinating. I thought one of the interesting points, and I don't probably gonna get all mixed up here. Another conversation we want to have was because at that campus they have a lot more full time staff. You're
Sure.
kind of the one that's connected. So if there's production meetings that need to be in on, or all kind of different things, you are the coordinator that's communicating the information back and forth.
Yeah, that's right. Probably more than even the broadcast site here in West Monroe, Sterlington and Ruston rely on our volunteers, and we have amazing teams. Some of those people are could lead campuses themselves, and so I'm so
Yeah.
grateful for that. So thankful that God has sent us those people. But quite literally, if there's a production, something that's happening this Sunday, for instance, this Sunday for us is Mother's Day, and so we are playing a Mother's Day video. Well, I'm in that meeting to hear, okay, here's the plan, and so I'm the one that takes that to our production team, who are volunteers, and make sure that they are well prepared for that video
Yeah.
that's being played locally. So just details and odds and ends like that throughout the week. I'm the sounding piece. I'm in between for those production or worship or sometimes kids meetings, and passing that information along. But all of those volunteers are
Yeah.
incredible, and I'm so grateful for them.
Yeah, which I think that really makes sense. As I left, because somebody could hear, man, that's meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday. Even as I was thinking back to our conversation, that really set some context that was important for me to understand. Was, I mean, you're kind of operating as the connector for multiple teams of volunteers back, which explains for the person who says, man, why would you be in meetings that much? It's just there's a lot of hats that you're wearing as far as even though the teams are going to carry it forward, you getting the information from for them during those couple days that you're in West Monroe.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about that is there is an aspect of like a serve team coordinator that I'm working in, and I truly believe that is as easy as I can make it for the volunteer when they get there on Sunday. I want them to find fulfillment in serving God's kingdom, and doing whatever that is. If that's making coffee, if that's greeting, if that's in production or worship, my job is to make it as easy as possible. And sometimes there are things that come up, but when it's easy and it's enjoyable, that's when people are finding fulfillment in serving God's kingdom.
Very cool. Well, I know on Saturday you've said it's kind of an on-call day for you. So talk to me through a little bit through Saturday and Sunday.
Sure. We have part of what Christchurch does that may be a little bit unique is there are a lot of events. In fact, we have an event coordinator on our staff. And so, in a couple of weekends, so the weekend after Mother's Day, we're having a Freedom Conference, and that Freedom Conference will be on Friday and Saturday during those days. And so, there are times when we're either preparing for something like an event, like a Mother's Day. We're actually going to the campus this Saturday to make sure that we have everything set up for Mother's Day, and then the next weekend we are running that event. And so we kind of view Saturday as just on call and as needed, and so happy to do that.
Yeah. And then what does a Sunday look like as a campus pastor?
So usually Sunday starts pretty early for me. I want to make sure things are right. Like I said, I want to set up our volunteers to succeed, and so I try to get to the campus. If I can get there before 6, I'm happy with that. 6 o'clock is would be good for me. And I just want to, the first thing I do is I try to walk the campus or try to see everything. If there are doors that need to be unlocked, I try to make sure I do that myself. And part of that is just because I need to walk the grounds myself. If there's any random trash or whatever, I try to make sure that's picked up. Those things sound small, but I would rather a production volunteer be able to focus on that, or I'd rather a coffee, hospitality volunteer be able to focus on that hospitality piece rather than some of those things that I could have done. And so I try to make sure everything looks the way it is, everything's ready for the volunteer to arrive. And my process is I would rather get there too early and have a little bit of time to relax and to talk with people than to get there too late and be addressing an issue with a projector that doesn't work up until service time. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the flow there. I try to get there early. We do have two services. We have 9:30 and 11, and so a good portion of those services have two separate teams. So like there's a different set of greeters for the next service. A good portion of those, like the worship team, serve in both services. And so there's just always times to talk with people or to address issues or opportunities as things come up. During the service itself, a lot of my responsibility, besides just being with people and doing my best to love on people, is we have live worship. And so any kind of transition that happens in the service, I'll take care of that, or part of my team takes care of that. And because that's my opportunity to speak in front of our congregation and the people that I pastor, we try to take those very seriously, those transitions very
Yeah.
seriously, and want them to see our heart and that we love them in the middle of that. So that's a big deal for us. So once we transition into sermon, and we can talk about that in more detail if you'd like, but once we transition to sermon, after the sermon, we always take an opportunity for those who don't know Jesus to know Him, and those who want to respond in some way to respond in a way that's meaningful for them. And so what that looks like for us is we make sure, as someone who's pastoring that moment, I take over that part of the service
Okay.
at the end. And
Very
so
cool.
we do that twice, and then afterwards, if there is some sort of class, there's a once a month we have a class directly after this, like a growth track or
Yeah.
a new members class maybe. We facilitate that. I have some team that do that, but I try to be a part of that. I try to be at least in the room and do whatever I can to serve that team member.
So, if you're enjoying this conversation, make sure and hit the subscribe button. You can follow along if you're interested in learning more about role clarity, about some of the different positions that we're talking to in the local church, and we're going to be digging into some others in the days to come. Make sure and hit that subscribe. You can also find information in the description below. But we're going to turn now to our next challenge, which is that looking at putting the role clarity into 4 buckets. So one of the most foundational things we talk about is the 4 roles that clarity thrives within constraints. And so a lot of times whenever I'm talking to a leader, I'll say, what are the 4 key roles for this position? And looking at, we listed all this stuff out. If you take that and had to put it into 4 buckets that contained at least 70% of what you do, what would be your approach? How would you see that? What would you list as your 4 key roles?
Yeah, sure. I love this question, by the way. This is really the first time that I've thought through this, that I've written some stuff down, and it was a great exercise for me to think through. Thank you for asking it in this way. These 4 buckets were good. When I'm answering it, I had to kind of decide my approach in the
Yeah.
answer. And so the first thing I started with is there's a spiritual bucket, and I think I'm supposed to say that as a pastor. Um, However, can I add that sometimes that spiritual bucket gets overlooked um, for for us who are leading others, and in this spiritual aspect. And so I think that there's a relational thing that happens with me and God, and that's a part of this spiritual bucket. And I've got to be making sure that I'm working in the spiritual disciplines, that I'm in the Word of God, that I am spending time in prayer, and that I have myself accountable to somebody. And so that's such an important part of this spiritual bucket. Those spiritual disciplines are a big deal for me personally, and I think they should be for any pastor. But I'm preaching now, so let me get
Yes.
back to my four buckets. Then there's a spiritual aspect for my family. So after myself, I need to lead my family well, and I need to lead them spiritually. I need to not only do I need to show them Jesus, but I need to make sure that they understand that He loves them and He wants the very best for them. He wants something for them, not just from them. And so I'm trying to live that out and teach that as a father. There's this part of the spiritual bucket as a father. And then there's this spiritual bucket for my church family, our congregation, that I want to lead them spiritually. I want to make sure that that's the very first priority before we grow. Let's be healthy. Let's grow spiritually. Before we grow in numbers, let's grow spiritually. And so
Yeah.
that's a huge, huge aspect for me. That's the first big bucket.
Yeah.
Um, Again, I think that might seem elementary, but that is it could be easily overlooked as we talk through these other buckets. Maybe
Yeah.
that's the one that we overlook.
Yeah, well, I think too. So I got to tell you now, you and I have not talked about this, and it's kind of like is the advanced level past the four roles, but we only do the four roles here. Four
Okay.
buckets is one of the ways that I do that. Teach people is then to do three descriptors under that, which is basically what you just did was your relationship with God, your families, and then the church, whatever. Which is such a cool having all three of those because then somebody's able to ask. Somebody say, "Oh yeah, I'm doing great spiritually." Well, it's like personally with your family, with the church. And for people wondering, like, what goes in that bucket, referencing back to the conversation we had about in the weeds. So that's going to be this. You lead a couple different small groups. What you're doing with the pastoral team on that Wednesday, plus the personal things you do. So just making sense for people. We're bucketing all of those things that would fall into that spiritual, bucket that you just named. So that's really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Helps you set priorities, right?
Yes, absolutely. All right, so number two. What's the number two bucket for you?
So the one I listed that made the most sense to me was a relational bucket. I think from a campus pastor's perspective, is there's a relation between myself and our church family. So it's important for me to work on that on Sundays. Can I say it this way? Is that sometimes it's easy to kind of disappear into the back office, or maybe disappear into a little issue that we're working on. But we've prayed all day,
Yeah,
all week, every
yeah,
day for people to show up at a location. And so when they're there, I want to spend as much time as I can with them and build some relationship there. So that's the first part of that relational bucket. And then for me as a campus pastor, there's always working with relationships with our local family and our local family. So individuals who come to Christ Church Ruston, I'm trying to help that relationship be better, that relationship grow.
hmm
And so I think that that's pretty indicative of every church. But what's unique about being a campus pastor is part of my responsibility is to help grow relationship between our local church family and our non-local church family. So we have this non-local church. We have two other locations with other people that are part of our church family.
yeah.
And so I want to make sure that I'm building relationship as much as with local to local, local to non-local.
Okay.
It's an interesting aspect of being a campus
Yeah.
pastor for sure.
Yeah, it's one of the things I love that you talked about too was just, I mean, it came up a lot whenever you and I were having discussions about just the relationships that you're trying to work with and develop in the, people there in Ruston, but also just the intentionality of, keeping those relationships strong with, the staff that works at the West Monroe campus and the church that's there and keeping everybody, connected. To me,
Yeah.
it definitely needs to be a bucket as much as you talked about it too. And then a lot of you said when we talked, I really took away too that, for you, Thursdays and Fridays, you're spending a good bit of time as a campus pastor trying to build those strong relationships with the people that are there in Ruston.
Yes, I do. And obviously, for me, I feel a little bit of a tension of those are the 2 days that I'm there. And so, as much as I can spend, as hard as I can, or as much as I can stack those meetings, I
Yeah,
really try to do that if at all possible.
very cool. All right, bucket number three.
Bucket number three, there's an organizational bucket. that I'm working with. I'm looking at all these now, and I see that I've split them off into 3 parts. I did not even realize that's what
I
I
know.
was supposed to do.
No,
Uh,
no
so,
instructions there.
so there's a staffing part of this bucket for organizational. Okay, so I work with local staff in Ruston, and then I work with non-local staff in West Monroe at the broadcast location. And so, although we don't have any full time staff there in Ruston, there are some people, some key leaders who really help us. And so, I try my best to pour into them, to lead them, not just spiritually, like we talked about earlier, or relationally, like we talked about earlier, but there's an organizational part of that as
Yeah.
well. They need to be informed of what's going on. To be unclear is to be unfair, and so I want to make sure that I'm as clear as possible. If they need to know, then I want them in the loop. And so both local, non-local, there's non-local staff that I'm working with at the broadcast location. Just the same, we're trying to make sure that everyone's on the same page organizationally.
Yeah.
So then the next part of that is we have serve team leads and small group leaders. They're speaking about locally in Ruston, and we want to make sure that all of them are informed, that all of them know the plan, all of them know the dates, everything like that. I work with some team leaders who help us get that information to the other team leads. And so, for my part in that is to make sure that those team leaders are resourced as much as possible. Sometimes that looks like me actually calling them, and sometimes that means me empowering someone else to take that responsibility on.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Most of leadership is empowering other people to lead. And
Yeah.
so I think I'm at my very best when I'm empowering others to do things that they do so well.
Yeah.
Um,
Which not to jump ahead to some other deeper dive questions we're going to do, but I think that's one of the real interesting things, takeaways about being a campus pastor, because the speaking is not as much as what somebody, if you were doing a church plant and whatever,
sure.
speaking 35, 45 times a year, is it really highlights that the development of people, the importance of those people. It's just front and center, like in a really tangible way. It just plays out very different, when you really think about it.
It does, and honestly, that's as a leader, it's so gratifying. It's such a reward to see someone else step up and be empowered to do it. I wish all leaders could experience that rush of getting someone
Yeah.
else to do it, and do it so much better than you could have done it to begin with.
Yes, that for sure is the best. Okay, bucket number 4.
Can I list one more thing? This is
Yeah,
number
sorry, don't
three
want
in
to jump
there.
ahead of it.
No,
Yeah.
no, you're good. So there's a serve team aspect to this. I know we talked about serve team leads and small group leaders, but then we have all of these different teams. And part of the reason I want to mention this is
Yeah.
because if someone from our church family hears this, I want them to know, hey, I thought about you. So like there we have kids team and worship production, all those
Yes.
greeters, hospitality events teams, and all of those people just as an organizational part, just getting them on the same page,
Yeah.
working with their team leads, doing whatever we can. Once a year we have this big serve team celebration, and we celebrate our core values with that serve team. And so part of what I do in that organizational space is make sure that all of those pieces are fitting together, and then if they don't, then what can we do? How can we rearrange a little bit?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
okay, so here's the next bucket is financial. So another kind of unique aspect of being a campus pastor is I work with a local budget, and then I work with a non-local budget. And so as the campus pastor, I have the responsibility of setting budget and watching income and outgo, and making sure all of those things are lining up properly in the ways they should. Um, so there's one of the aspects of campus ministry again is that I need to make sure that our local campus budget fits within the vision for our church as a whole. And so just because we want something specific, if we wanted a swimming pool, that doesn't fit in the vision of the
Yeah.
bigger organization. And so guarding that and watching that. How are we spending our money? It's an indicator, one of the indicators of our priorities, and so and the way our culture is at our church locally. And so I need to make sure that that vision is clear to our people on site locally, making sure that it lines up with any non-local vision.
So let's make sure we write down spiritual, relational, organizational, and then financial. I want to just say, if you're interested in clarifying your four key roles. Maybe you're wondering, what would that look like for your position? I actually have created a guide that will walk you through this process. And so it will help you go through each step where you can decide what you consider to be the four key roles. I always tell people, if this is a reflection exercise for you, or maybe you want to grab a friend, jump on a video call and say, hey, what did you put down for your answers? What did I put down for mine? Let's talk about it and see where that lands. I hope it's beneficial. You can find a link to that in the description below. But this is the portion where we're going to be diving deeper. So we've talked about going in the weeds. We clarified those roles. But now I just want to ask some of the questions of, just a little bit digging deeper. And Amos and I we did talk for a long time. We could probably talk for several hours on this. But we're going to pick a couple of these out. Okay, so Amos, how have your expectations of what it means to be a campus pastor changed in the 3 years that you have filled this role? So I'm kind of bring me in what you thought it was going to be, probably whenever you first came to where you're at now. How have those expectations changed?
That's a great question. Approaching what I do, um, again, was not something it was easily researchable. Here's an interesting thing about being a campus pastor is that for every other, for almost for every other point of research or point of ministry, I could hop online and see what other people were doing. I could watch their service. An interesting thing about campus pastoring is that there are no campus pastors streaming their service, especially if they stream in the sermon. And so it all comes from the broadcast location. And so, for me, living in Mississippi, there are several churches who are doing multi-site very, very well, and they're incredible. But there were none close to me at that point. And so, as from coming into that, not really understanding fully exactly what that looked like, um, two things. Number one is I felt an honest call from the Lord that that's what I needed to do. And number two is I felt like all the areas in which I had tried to prepare myself for whatever my next step was, however God was going to lead me, I still felt unprepared because I hadn't researched this thing specifically. I love to research. I love to see how things are done. And so coming in before not really knowing, I played things as slow as I could. It was our church family is an amazing church family, and I wanted to make sure that we had stability before we changed anything. And so that was a big deal for me. And my approach is a little bit different now. I feel like that there's a saying that I love, and I'm living this out. The first year you're the pastor, and then in about 3 years in, you become our pastor, and then about year five, you become my pastor. And so those first few years were really crucial. As the pastor, I wanted to get to the place where I was their pastor and my pastor. And so when you become my pastor, there's a lot of trust that's built up, and a lot of relational equity that's built up. So my approach was be slow and be stable, and then we can change some things and work together even better as years progress.
Yeah, and do you think that relational component is even bigger because for you really it's just the relationship with them, because you're not, I understand that at the parts of service you're up there, but you're not preaching a full message, most Sundays. Does that heighten the need to really build strong relationships with the church body?
Yes, again, great question. I really think so. I think it made even the time in between services, before services and after services, and those Thursdays and Fridays I'm talking about, it made it even more important.
Yeah.
It made it even a higher priority because that's the time in which they could know me. They could see my heart, and that I really wanted God's best for them.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, so far we could dig here about this, the unique perspective of campus pastor, but I want to get to this next question. I know you're a thoughtful guy, so I wrote down: considering your experience as a campus pastor, what are the key things you would be looking for in someone if you were in charge of hiring a campus pastor? So having done it, if you were hiring someone, what are you looking for besides God's telling you what to do?
Sure. I think that there are, a lot of times we look at people as either task oriented or people oriented. There are so many tasks that are a part of my responsibility throughout the week. there are a lot of times when no one else sees what I'm doing. I'm the only staff member there, and so there's a little bit of drive there within the task that's so important. However, and I'm more of a task driven person, but you have to be willing to be able to work on this relational aspect as well. You have to step outside of that task driven nature and work within relationship. And so if I were hiring a campus pastor right now, I would be looking for how will they manage both of those together? Like, what does that look like? And I'm not saying that I do that perfectly, but I am saying that's something I work very hard on. And so that's probably one of the biggest aspects. People need to know that you're going to serve with them and that they can trust you, that you're
Yeah.
going to love them. And so I think that those two things coupled together are incredibly important.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is walking, you're really digging into the drive to take on the task of getting the things done because you're running a campus. It's closer to to a small church pastor doing everything. You've told funny stories about grabbing mud boots and cleaning out part of the parking lot. So there's that that task part, but then also such a heavy people because you rely so much on serve teams and volunteers to do those things, and so you would be trying to gather those two sides of the conversation. Somebody who's all people but that struggles to actually follow through and get things done is probably going to struggle. But also somebody who's all task is probably going to struggle.
Yes, right. And that's not to say that we don't lean one way or the other, but you've got to have both. And I think that's one of the key things I would really be studying if I were hiring someone.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to think about the questions you could ask. Somebody should be asking to see, to get stories to see how you deal with those two.
Mm.
So one thing that's come on my mind, and just I've thought about this before, is do you think that this role of campus pastor, as it's grown and gotten bigger over the last 20 years, has opened the door for some different people in ministry, or maybe made some people possibly really could be successful in this role that maybe would not be, successful in planting a church and doing that all themselves. And that's not putting that on you, because I know you probably could preach your tail off as much as you needed to. But if there was somebody out there who said, like, "Hey, I don't feel called to preach 40 times a year, but I'd love to lead a campus." I mean, can you see where that has gotten some exciting opportunities?
I do, and I honestly think that as someone in ministry, we always want to answer the call of what we're being asked to do in that moment. And so that's a big part of who we are as Christians, right? We want to be all things to all people. What does God's kingdom need right now? It's so interesting to me that from just a preaching perspective, we always quote that famous quote about deliver the gospel and if necessary use words.
Yeah.
But there's so much opportunity with every single church leader to deliver the gospel every single day in your interactions with people. And then on Sundays with your interaction with teams and serve teams and new people coming in, that has nothing to do with what you say up on the pulpit or up on the stage. And so there's an aspect of every single person that works on our staff that we're just here to serve the kingdom of God in whatever way that looks like. And I tell our serve team that whether you're making coffee or whether you're leading worship, it's so important. Both are so important. We can't go without coffee, and we don't need to go without worship.
Yeah.
There would probably be a bigger riot if we didn't have the coffee than if we didn't have the worship. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
but my point in that is that we're all communicating the gospel in some way.
Yeah.
And so for me, it would be detrimental to my family. It'd be detrimental to my leadership if I thought the best thing that I could do was to get up there and to preach. Because we all can't do that. We all can't
Yeah.
get up there and speak. And so I do think, to answer your question a little bit, is that a little bit? Do you hear me? I'm just going to answer just a little bit of your question. To answer your question though, it's like it does open up this space of like maybe I'm not a speaker. Maybe that's not how I think, or maybe I don't work structurally that way. And there's an opportunity for me to lead these people. Incidentally, if that's you and if you're thinking that, then I would suggest dive into some small groups, because there's a little church that you can lead right there and pastor some people as a small group leader in a small group.
Very cool. Yeah, I think it's one of the most exciting things for people who feel some call to ministry who are younger. Just the amount of avenues to do that versus what it was even 20 years ago. Just there was a few 5 possible jobs you could take in ministry. If you don't like those
Sure.
5, good luck. And so I think it's just another exciting opportunity for someone who maybe doesn't feel the call to preach that many times, but that has that pastoral heart. So I think that's always
Sure.
that's an exciting opportunity. Okay, so last question that I wanted to talk about is, how do you handle the challenge of, when talking about church culture, of a multi-site? So you have the overall church culture, and also we know that there's also this culture that happens in a local body, like in Ruston. How do you navigate, creating unity in, you want a strong culture there at your campus, but also making sure that that's aligned with the culture of the entire church?
Yeah, that's a big question. Obviously, one of the biggest responsibilities I have. I do think it's important to note that each community has a different feel, and so culture is different than a community feel. So our church culture, we try to build it off of our 5 core values, and off of those values is the lens and what we view as we do as how we deal with church and organization. But I
Yeah,
also know that people in Ruston, in the town that I have the privilege to serve, are just different than people in West Monroe and people in Sterlington. They've had
yeah,
different sets of life experiences. The towns look very different. In Ruston, there are 2 4-year universities within 5 miles of each other, right there near our campus, and some of the other campuses don't have that unique opportunity. And so, I to understand and how to build on culture, I have to understand that communities do feel different. So I'm not fighting the community feel. What I'm trying to do is say this is what we do as an organization. And so this is the cultural values that we have. Now how does it interact with the community feel? And I think that's the tension. I think that's the balance. And that's a working progress
yeah.
all the time.
I like that distinction between community and
Mhm.
culture, and I think part of this question came up too, just because it was a pretty significant theme when you and I talked about just how much you are working to create, an alignment where everybody feels like they're on the same team. That the people in Ruston are excited for West Monroe's excited for Ruston. That they're all a part of this one family. And so I think pointing back to core values and how those play out is just a way of like, okay, we're all speaking the same language here. It
Yeah.
just looks different in each of our communities.
That's right. And I would say that if we are not communicating, then the same language doesn't happen. And
Yeah,
so that just means that those meetings that we talked about earlier, that just means they're so much more important, because we all have to be, as you said, saying the same thing and saying it at the same time. And it's not about uniformity. In other words, again, it doesn't take away from that community feel. It's about just the culture of this is who we are, and this is the church family that we have this amazing privilege of being a part of.
yeah. Awesome. Amos, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me last week and then again today. It's been a fun conversation. I really appreciate you. I appreciate all that you do and all that I have learned and I have grown, even just talking about leadership with you and the way that your roles play out. So, man, I'm just praying God bless you in the days ahead, my friend.
Hey, thank you so much. And same goes for me. So much fun talking with you. I feel like we are kindred spirits, and I know I'm so thankful for the people that you lead, for the people who are hearing not just this interview but other interviews. I know it's meaningful for them, and it's impacting the kingdom of God, which is what we're both about. And
Yeah.
so grateful for you and what you do.
Awesome. And you know that you have found a kindred spirit whenever you think, if people were listening to our conversation, they would be like, man, this is the nerdiest stuff I've ever heard. Like, that's whenever you have found a true kindred spirit. So, hey, thank you for checking out this Role Clarity Roundup conversation. Once again, there have been other interviews with worship leaders, bivocational church planners, got a couple others that are coming up. And then coming up in seasons ahead, we're going to be looking at different roles in small businesses. But if you're interested in Role Clarity, you can check out the site at roleclarity.co. Also in the description, once again, you can get the free download to determine what your 4 key roles are. And if you find something interesting, shoot me an email, lee@leetaylor.tv. I'd love to hear what you landed at, what your thoughts were. Thanks again. Hope this is a blessing, and we'll see you next time.